All right. So let me say that Selene Arfini is a postdoctoral fellow in philosophy of science and a member of the computational philosophy laboratory at the Department of Humanities, philosophy section at the University of Pavia. The title of her research is Ignorance in the Perspective of the Ecology of Cognition, Cognitive Niches, the Extended Mind, and Ignorance-Based Reasoning. Her research interests fall in the domain of epistemology, philosophy of science, epistemic cognition, and philosophy of cognitive science. And her current work involves the foundation of a cognitively oriented epistemology of ignorance, with reference to the extended mind theory, cognitive niches, construction studies, and a naturalized perspective on logic. Thank you very much, Selene.
Thank you, Thomas and Wendy, for inviting me. In the meantime, I opened the PowerPoint. Oops, sorry. Okay. Share. I think you can now see the presentation, but not, sorry.
Correct.
In the meantime, I wanted to thank you guys and give you my compliments for having organizing this quite nice event. And I wanted to start with an honest observation. Conferences on serendipity are always stimulating and in a way self-referential. Indeed, if everything goes well, we can experience at least something of what all the speakers are going to discuss, whether it is a serendipitous encounter, an unexpected discussion, or if we are lucky, a new insight. So this might be true for all conferences, but before the ones on serendipity, I usually begin with this kind of expectations, and it's hard for me to be disappointed. And I'm not saying that just to flattering the audience here, but one of the main reasons for what I'm going to argue in this presentation is that I believe that there is a correlation between well-oriented expectations and the happening of serendipity and good collaborative interdisciplinarity. More than that, I believe that by focusing on this expectation, we can get a reason why good perform interdisciplinarity boosts serendipity and why often serendipity leads to building interdisciplinary collaborations. So to be clear, my intention here is not simply to link good interdisciplinarity to frequent episodes of serendipity. That has already been done in different papers. Indeed, in the literature on both interdisciplinarity and serendipity, the connection between the two themes has already been proven. My goal is to answer, or to try to answer, the why is that question. Why does serendipity boost interdisciplinarity, and why we can easily find examples of serendipitous encounters in interdisciplinary frameworks. I know that the initial title of my presentation was still pending questions for cognitive science, plural, but I hope I can convince you that this query is fairly comprehensive and broad to encompass other minor ones. So I think this question becomes important when we realize three things. First, both serendipity and good collaborative interdisciplinarity are usually understood as rare events or hard to come by events. Indeed, we are used to thinking about interdisciplinary collaboration as almost a work of art. It could depend on luck, it could depend on patient, friendship, responsibility, good science alone, and so on. We know that, as Donaldson says, good collaborative interdisciplinarity is a messy business that almost never happens smoothly at the first try. And believe me, I know that even the formula good collaborative interdisciplinarity is controversial. I think it involves both epistemological results and valuable personal connection, but it is not a broadly accepted opinion. Anyway, I don't want to waste too much time around this concept here. So if it is still an obscure description by the end of my presentation, I promise to make it clear on the Q&A time. Anyway, the same goes for serendipity. It is usually recognized as the fact that there are numerous definitions for it, which appeals to various keywords or key concepts. Anyway, all scholars agree upon the fact that serendipity depends, for example, on unplanned action. And it involves at some level luck or epistemic luck. And it usually relies upon the certainly not so clear as a day qualities of wisdom and sagacity. All these concepts, as well as others that appear on the slide, do not draw the picture of a phenomenon that can be easily replicated or that can appear out of the blue when called upon. Actually, it seems rather what does not happen when over-preparation is involved. However, the second reason that makes the why questions relevant is the fact that is the growing presence of interdisciplinarity in our academic life. Since cognitive science is the main disciplinary framework in which this symposium is constructed, we don't need to look too far. Indeed, rather than a disciplinary framework, we can see cognitive science as representing one of the most successful interdisciplinary programs in today's science, which needs both productive interdisciplinarity and serendipitous event to get better scientific results. Lastly, another reason for getting an answer to the why question, and fast, is that when we study both serendipity and collaborative interdisciplinarity as boosts for each other, we can analyze the cognitive processes that support the relation, making them less and less mysterious, and in time, and hopefully, less and less rare. So, last clarification. I need to clarify that by appealing to this reason, I don't mean to say that without interdisciplinarity, we would not have serendipitous encounters, or that without serendipity, we would not have interdisciplinary collaboration or cognitive science. Instead, I'm arguing that apparently so far without a specific good reason, when good interdisciplinary collaboration emerge, they produce serendipitous discoveries, and when serendipity is cultivated, it is easier to fall into interdisciplinary projects. So how to answer to the why question? As a last preamble, I need to say that, of course, my presentation has no pretensions to be exhaustive. I think there are other good reasons, good answer to the question I'm approaching. My answer and my approach depend heavily on the topic I've been studying for quite some time now, and which appeals to a notion that has been haunting philosophy in the last decades: ignorance. I know that usually a presentation should not focus on more than one problematic idea, and now we are juggling with three. But I promise, ignorance will not be a too heavy addendum in this discussion. In fact, in the next 10 minutes, I will defend the thesis that we implicitly chew ignorance over every time we think about the well-oriented expectation related to both serendipity and productive interdisciplinary collaborations. More than that, I will argue that, strangely, the two types of ignorance that we face when we discover something serendipitously and when we engage in a productive interdisciplinary collaborations are the same. That will be not only part of my answer to the question regarding the connection between the two themes, but also why I think we should consider each topic with respect to the other to pragmatically boost them in our research. So to begin the juggling process, I will start with the concept that is usually least familiar in a cognitive science conference: ignorance. Well, the ordinary word and meaning should be actually fairly familiar with everyone in the room, or rooms in this case. But in the philosophical framework, authors have come up with a lot of definitions for it, or for one of its many instantiations. Ignorance will not only refer to a lack of knowledge or true belief in this presentation, but I will refer to a broad and general description for it. And we can define it as a cognitive state of an agent whose actions and thoughts are affected by an epistemic limitation. In particular, I will focus on what the psychology and philosophical literature refer to as pluralistic ignorance, which I'm going into details later on. So, after offering the brief and broad definition of ignorance, we can ask, what does it have to do with serendipity? And to answer that, let's talk about the haha moment, or as chemists call it, the element of surprise. Surprise, or the unexpected feature of serendipity, is what properly sets aside serendipitous discoveries from regular ones. It is what contributes to define serendipity as an happy accident, and which implicitly make it closer to a lucky event. It is also what defies ambition to control and purposely enact serendipity out of the blue. And at the same time, it is what permits us to recognize a serendipitous event only once it has already happened. If we did not plan to discover something, reach a conclusion, or find a particular solution to a problem, then we are surprised, and we are probably facing a case of serendipity. So surprise is typical of this phenomenon, and ignorance is a key feature of it. Indeed, it is rather trivial to assume that unexpected implies ignorance in some way. If there is a surprise, there must be something that the surprised person did not know about beforehand. So for this reason, I believe that whenever we talk about serendipity, we implicitly also reflect upon a kind of ignorance. The interesting question for me here is, what is the surprised person ignorant about? Now, let's freeze this thought for a moment, and before we try to provide an answer to this question, let's switch topic and briefly focus on interdisciplinary collaborations. In interdisciplinary collaboration, ignorance is more subtle, but it is implied nonetheless. To get an idea of the amount of ignorance that it is involved in an interdisciplinary collaboration, we should first focus or direct our attention to the idea of discipline or disciplinary boundaries. Here's a quote that can help with that. Each discipline can be compared to a jar. Once we are in the jar, it takes genius to get ourselves out of it or to innovate. We feel like the jar's boundaries are natural. So usually when reading a sentence like that, the first instinct is to embrace the metaphor as an image that defines abstract objects and features. In this case, it is easy to think about the jar of one discipline as representing conceptual boundaries, the theoretical framework in which any of us who engages in one discipline finds herself or himself in. Although that does not seem wrong, I believe that just thinking about theoretical boundaries in this case is not enough. When engaging with a discipline, we find ourselves interrelated with not only abstract concepts, figures, and frameworks, but also material tools, a community of more or less like-minded people, an environment in which through education and efforts, after a few years, we begin feeling at home. And I think that is that feeling of being at home, as well as the tools, the community, and the material environment that defines our jar. So in order to start an interdisciplinary collaboration, we of course have to admit that we are in a limited jar. However, that does not mean that we recognize how much we don't know about what is out of it. We obviously assume that we need someone else's expertise and experience to reach a particular scientific goal. Anyway, this acknowledgement does not come with the understanding of how much we don't know about their jar. And this is not just speculation. Evidence from countless case studies on interdisciplinary collaboration that did not click, at least for a while, report people who misattribute timelines, use of resources, funds to the team members from other disciplinary backgrounds. Maybe the most evident case is the one registered by two philosophers of science, Miles McLeod and Nersi Nersesyan. They followed the development in problem-solving strategies and collaboration of two integrative biologist laboratories for 5 years. And in these laboratories were two types of scientists. The experimenters, who were molecular biologists with no training in modeling, and modelers, mostly engineers, who confessed to never had any experimental training before. In 5 years, especially at the beginning, McLeod and Nersesyan give a lot of examples where modelers could not work with data biologists provided because they claimed they were not relevant for model construction. Meanwhile, the biologists kept complaining about the absurd requirements of modelers that expected data too quickly or that were very hard to get from the usual experiment performance. Sorry, I had the scientist, sorry, for a bit, I stopped for a moment. So the scientists attributed this problem to various causes, and the lack of communication was clearly on top of their list. But it is my argument that these problems ultimately depended on ignorance. And ignorance intended as the difficulty of understanding others' priorities, tools, needs, and so on. But of course, attributing this kind of problematic situation to the broadly conceived ignorance is not enough. Notwithstanding the attempts to reduce ignorance or to define ignorance to a specific and well-defined concept, ignorance in a broad sense still remains too general and a concept that can be used to deflect from arguments instead of dive deeply into them. So to understand the problems that are easy to arise in an interdisciplinary collaboration, as well as the ignorance that encompasses the unexpected feature of serendipity, I propose to use a particular instantation of ignorance, which is the pluralistic one. The concept of pluralistic ignorance is grounded on people expectation and on the hard time that we inevitably have when we try to recognize and rationalize those expectations. According to O'Gorman, one of the first scholars who studied this phenomenon, pluralistic ignorance refers to the erroneous cognitive beliefs about the ideas, feelings, and action of others. These beliefs are usually shared by two or more people and guide them to adapt their behavior to particular circumstances. These expectations, these beliefs, usually remain opaque to those people. In sum, pluralistic ignorance defines a set of beliefs and expectation regarding them that is mistakenly considered to be correct. Now, for interdisciplinarity, it's easy to see where this is going. Pluralistic ignorance is the effect of the boundaries of disciplinary jar. We believe we can form a realistic expectation on others' work and methodology, even when we do know that we are working together exactly because our methods and tools are different. The problem of becoming aware of these beliefs, of these expectations, is that we are not in full control of what we believe, of what we expect. We form expectation whether we want it or not. I think that exactly for this reason, discussing the kind of ignorance that is involved in serendipitous discovery can useful. My argument is that when that we experience a sort of pluralistic ignorance even before the happening of a serendipitous event. To be more precise, we form expectations and belief regarding ideas, feelings, and actions of people that we do not know yet, us in the future, the people who have already found out the solution we struggle to reach, or who have already discovered something, even when it was not in their plans. Of course, if we regard the serendipitous event as the barrier that separates the two groups of people, we need to acknowledge that the key role of chance in this process, even an internal trigger if we want to reconnect with the previous presentation. So the unexpected feature of serendipity tricks us into thinking that we are right in predicting what will be our actions, beliefs and ideas in the future. However, once we perform a serendipitous discovery, we realize that we could not prepare for it, but, and I don't want to sound as a cryptic philosopher here, we could be prepared for it. Now, what does that mean? So, expectation regarding serendipity should be taken into consideration here, exactly because we know ignorance is a key part of the serendipity game. We should be vigilant about our ignorance in every step of the way in our research, for example. And admitting that our discipline is ajar helps with that. Because I believe we can say the same thing about interdisciplinary collaborations. Once we adopt the perspective that our jar is limited and we can just prepare up to a point for it, for the collaboration with other disciplines, we are ready to negotiate more. We are prepared for chance-related discoveries. Being aware of the traps of pluralistic ignorance does not mean that we cannot fall into it, but we can prepare to speak up even when it seems not convenient. And moreover, I believe that by building expectations over interdisciplinarity as a context in which serendipity has more chance to happen, will make the people involved more aware of their pluralistic ignorance. At the same time, approaching research as a serendipity minefield should bring out the fact that some notions, ideas, and theories can be productively approached by the connection with other disciplines. In sum, I think if we know about the jar, it's easier for us to look out for its wall. Anyway, as you may have noticed, I'm still studying this material. I have done research on both interdisciplinarity and serendipity, but in isolation. I've just begun to appreciate the interesting aspect that the combination brings out. So if you have a suggestion and comment on how to approach these topics, even from a methodological point of view, they will be very, very welcome. Here's the bit of bibliography I used for this talk, and I thank you very, very much for your attention. I don't know if I'm short in time or...
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Selene. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very, very much.